now for Labor Press, your source for daily labor news and industry information. Hear discussions on the workplace and interesting talk from prominent and influential personalities in the labor community. And now your hosts, Neil Tippel and Bill Holfeld.
Accountability.
Welcome to Labor Press Radio, the show that talks about everyday workers. I'm your host, Neil Tippel. My co-host is Bill Holfeld. Our engineer is Joe Maniscalco. Our first guests for this segment are Vito Pitta, a partner in Pitta, Giblin Baione, and Christopher Baione, also a partner in the law firm. And we're going to be talking about the health issues related to the 9/11 attack and the Zadrota Act. Vito, tell us a little background about the act and about the benefits, the 9/11 benefits.
Good morning, Neil. Bill, thanks for having us on.
It's good to have you.
A lot of people obviously are familiar with the terrible tragedy of September 11th, but what a lot of people have not been aware of is that there are thousands of people that were exposed, not necessarily to the immediate aftermath of the attacks, but just from being in the vicinity of the attacks, have been exposed to harmful chemicals and now are suffering debilitating illnesses. So at the end of last year, Congress passed, and in January of this year, President Obama signed the James Zadrota Health and Compensation Act reauthorization. It provides billions of dollars of additional money for health care and for compensation benefits for people that have contracted 9/11 related illnesses. The original James Zadrota Act was passed in 2010, named for NYPD Detective James Zadrota, who was a recovery worker and responder who unfortunately and tragically suffered a fatal illness from his exposure. And in the immediate aftermath of September 11th, the federal government told 9/11 first responders, recovery workers, and Lower Manhattan residents that the air around Ground Zero was safe to breathe. Unfortunately, that wasn't true. We've learned in the years since that the chemicals that were in the air and the contaminants numbered more than 2,500. And some of the most harmful were pulverized concrete, glass, asbestos, lead, mercury, silica, and plenty of other toxins and carcinogens. So the latest reauthorization of this act is available now to provide benefits for the next 5 years for people that have suffered economic losses, and it provides health care benefits for the next 75 years. So we are here today to make sure your listeners are aware of the act and to encourage them, if they believe that they may have suffered 9/11 related illnesses, to register, and certainly we are happy to help them any way we can.
Now, if somebody thinks, Vito, that they have a related injury due to 9/11, what would be the process they would go through? Where would they go? Who would they see? Where would they register?
Hi, Bill. It's Chris Baione. So I'll answer that one. The best thing to do is to first register on the VCF website, vcf.gov, and that would ensure that you would meet the deadlines as long as your condition was diagnosed within the right time frame, and that varies depending on a case-by-case basis. And that's part of what we do, is to advise our clients first if they meet the deadline, and if so, we advise them through every step of the process with the Victim Compensation Fund, which is one of the two government benefit programs that was created by the Zadrota Act, the other being the World Trade Center Health Program. Now, the Victim Compensation Fund is administered by the Department of Justice, and it has strict procedures and criteria necessary to get through it. some of which, every single step requires supporting documentation and proof. And at some points it gets pretty complicated when it comes down to the lost earnings and benefits that were lost by many of the tradesmen and women who were down at ground zero, and also those who lived and worked around the vicinity. And it's very important that that is documented accurately to prevent a VCF claim that would be lower than it should be.
Oh, I would imagine, though, Chris, that presents some problems for some of the businesses that were just demolished and weren't there anymore. That there must be some people that are having difficulty, with their burden of proof of saying, look, this is where I worked at that time.
Right, and also considering the amount of time that has passed since 9/11, it can be difficult. But there are ways to get into the program, and we help the clients and claimants rather get into the process, regardless of what proof is available, because there are other ways to do it, such as hearings and affidavits from friends and family who have seen them or know that they were there.
So it's a complicated process, but with the right guidance, a person can navigate their way through it.
That's correct. It is designed to be friendly to clients and claimants, rather, to do it on their own. But when it gets into more complicated cases, 83% of the registrants are represented by attorneys.
Vito, how did the legislation come about?
So the initial instantation of the legislation was really a product of the New York delegation. A lot of the unions that represent first responders and recovery workers, the uniformed services, the construction trades primarily, advocacy groups, and really the larger labor community in New York City. There was initial opposition, strong opposition, from certain members of Congress that did not want to authorize this large of a sum, billions of dollars, which they didn't think was a prudent use of government resources. But because of the strong advocacy by all those groups, even assisted by editorial boards and what has become a very well-known segment on Jon Stewart and his advocacy, we actually were able to shame mostly Republican members of the House and the Senate to move the bill and make it into law.
And Vito, your dad was involved in lobbying and gaining the legislation. Tell us a little background about what took place in the early days in order that this legislation became in effect.
Sure. Our current firm, Pitta, Giblin Baione, is affiliated with two other firms that are very well known in the labor community, Pitta and Giblin LLP, which is a union-side labor law firm that does traditional labor and employment law, and Pitta, Bishop, Del Giorno, and Giblin, a New York City and New York State lobbying firm that represents unions throughout New York City and New York State. One of those unions, a couple of those unions are uniformed unions, the Detectives Endowment Association, the Sanitation Workers, New York City Sanitation Workers, the Correction Officers Benevolent Association. All of these unions had a particular interest in this legislation because their members were directly affected, as well as the construction trades unions that we represent. So we, along with other advocates and other lobbying organizations and the unions themselves, identified union members, retired and active, throughout the country, and we engaged in an advocacy campaign to reach out to our federal elected officials to make sure that they knew that this was not just a New York City issue. This affected everyone throughout the country. As Chris can tell you, there are registrants and people that are making claims from the fund from every state in the country. So this is really a national issue.
Chris, let's talk about the numbers of people that have been affected and will be affected by this law and the 9/11 attack.
Right. So to date, there's over 70,000 members of the World Trade Center Health Program, and to be a member, you have to be certified as having a condition the physicians consider to be related to your exposure. So that's a large number. Out of the people who were exposed, the government estimated that 500,000 were exposed just in Manhattan alone, below Canal Street, and they predict that of those 500,000, 35,000 unfortunately will develop a type of covered cancer over the next 10 years.
And doesn't some of this funding also go to the World Trade Center monitoring program that keeps up, which is really excellent program in terms of preventative measures, because it affords people who are down there in a volunteer basis to be screened on an annual basis to make sure they're not developing these diseases.
Right, that's correct. And a lot of the union members who already have healthcare benefits, we still encourage to take advantage of the health program. For that reason, because these doctors are specialized in this field. They know what to look for. They know what to see on a scan, let's say a lung nodule, and keep an eye on that. It offers a second opinion to their private doctors. And also, it has a research and monitoring element to it, that the more people who are enrolled, the more accurate the data will be as the health program examines the current conditions that are approved, and also future conditions. And right now we're seeing an abundance of autoimmune diseases and nerve conditions such as neuropathy that is becoming more prevalent, and having the health program on top of it and having the more applicants in there allows them create better data to include new conditions in the future.
Well, we can't thank you enough for all the help that you're giving to the people out there to make sure that they're getting the services provided to them that they so richly deserve.
We've been talking with Chris Baione and Vito Pitta. They are partners with Pitta, Giblin, and Baione, and we've been talking about the effects of the 9/11 attack. This is Neil Patel for Labor Press Radio.
You're listening to Labor Press on AM 970, The Answer.
Hey, Neil, we're back, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different types of people who were affected by this, because as we all know, we all, revere and respect our uniformed first responders, but they weren't the only people there. And let's talk a little bit about the people who were not in uniform but played a vital role down there.
So besides the uniform people that everyone expects to have been down there, we also have a multitude of volunteers who traveled from all over the country into Manhattan after the attacks to do whatever they can, as well as residents of Manhattan who traveled downtown from uptown and from other boroughs. And they took it upon themselves to get down there somehow, get through the checkpoints and help out in any way they could. And for the first few weeks, they were allowed to get in there and volunteer until the government was able to establish more concrete procedures and allow the professionals to come in from all over the country, from the emergency response teams. Aside from that, you have the average worker who just worked downtown and was exposed through the air, traveled in through the ducts of the buildings, got stuck in the air conditioning systems, and as we know, it's very difficult to sanitize those systems and remove those contaminants, no matter how hard you try. And those people continued working there while the fire still burned below the ground of Ground Zero. We also have students who were at schools, such as Stuyvesant High School. We have people who travel to and from through the neighborhood, commuting, one of which is Vito, actually, who did travel through there. He could tell you how it smelled. And,
why don't you talk a little bit about that, Vito?
Sure. Many of us have terrible memories of that day, and we all have our own stories. At the time, I was at Regis High School in Manhattan, and my daily commute passed by the Trade Center.
Good school.
Yes, it is. I was already at school when the attacks took place, but for the months after that, I drove by the site every day. There was that terrible smell in the air that anyone that has experienced will never forget. And the drive through that site and that wrecked area every day was a very powerful. It was a very powerful image. And the following summer, I was in my sophomore year of high school. I actually interned with the Tunnel to Towers Fund, which provided about $100 million benefits to families of victims of 9/11. So that was really my first experience with the attacks and with compensating people that lost loved ones and were hurt by the attacks.
You know, you touch on an interesting point there, because when you talk about those images that are so, strong in people's minds, I know that part of that screening process that they go through when you go down for your medical is there's a mental health examination, because so many people suffered, post-traumatic stress disorder from that event. Can you talk about that a little bit, Chris?
Sure. Speaking with hundreds and hundreds of responders, residents, and others affected by this, almost all of them have some sort of psychological condition related to what they saw and smelled downtown at the other crash sites. Most commonly is PTSD, which is normally seen among war veterans, and the horrors that they witnessed have really affected them to the point where it's destroying their relationships with their spouses and families, causing divides, divorces, and the government recognized this, at least within the health program, by providing free treatment and medication to people suffering from PTSD and anxiety-related disorders, also providing them with some group therapy programs that I've heard from claimants to be very helpful. So we applaud that. Unfortunately, it's not included in the Victim Compensation Fund, so there's no monetary compensation available to those who may have been disabled from these conditions.
And it would be very hard to place a dollar figure on that type of injury as well. That's always the problem with that, but it's good that there's some treatment available.
That's right.
The reason that the legislation covers all, because if I remember looking at the site, and thousands of tradesmen came from all over the United States, and unfortunately didn't realize or didn't care. These were Americans that wanted to do the right thing for America, and they were digging out that debris. And in the beginning, we all thought that there were others that were buried in that debris. So tell us a little bit about the legislation and how you're reaching out to those many volunteers that came from all over the United States during that terrible time.
Well, I think one of the ways is coming on this program today. We want to make sure all your listeners take this information with them and communicate with their friends and families that that information is disseminated that way. We have a website that is not our primary law firm website, but is more of a blog that lays out.
Why don't you tell the listeners what that website is?
That website is 911benefits.com, 911 in numerals. And on that website, they can read some more information about covered conditions, eligibility criteria, and certainly if they have any questions, our phone number is on there, and we're happy to speak to them. We also have some future events planned to do some community outreach, hosting some seminars, talking to people about it, and reaching out to elected officials so that they can inform their constituents.
We are talking with attorneys Chris Baione and Vito Pitta. Next up, we are going to be joined by 9/11 volunteer Claudia Thomas. This is Neil Tappel for Labor Press Network Radio, and we are the network that provides you Blue Collar Buzz. And with us, our co-host, Bill Hofeld. We are back with attorneys Chris Baione. Joining us now is 9/11 volunteer Claudia Thomas to talk about her experiences right after 9/11. And Vito is still with us. And Claudia?
Yes.
Yes. Tell us about your experiences following 9/11.
Well, I responded under the Port Authority and served on the New Jersey's CISM team, which is Critical Incident Distress Management. And I served as a team leader over at the site for about a month. And I also went to Port Authority satellite areas such as the 42nd Street Terminal, Newark Airport, the bridges, tunnels, and also out to Bellevue to provide counseling and support. Out of Bellevue, I met with Will Hamino, who you may be familiar with. Will was one of the last individuals rescued. He was a Port Authority police officer who was rescued from the buildings late that night.
Well, Claudia, the first thing we need to say, in addition to good morning, is thank you.
Well, it was a privilege. It was a privilege and an honor, and something that I do all over again. You know, I'm sure you mentioned that you have been talking about Zadroga. There are a lot of us who are sick. I've been running a support group. It's a real grassroots peer support advocacy. We do remembrance honor rolls and that for responders, family members, survivors, and provide a lot of really good and helpful information, and we're there for one another. So the 9/11 Rescue Workers and Friends Forum has been around we're coming up on our 9th anniversary now, and like I said, we're real grassroots, and I think that works really well for our community. We worked on the Zadroga, we're more in the back shadows. We may not have our picture out there in front of everybody, but we work hard for one another, and we work hard as a community.
And Claudia, could you give us just a brief snapshot of what a typical, I know that's not exactly a good word, but what a typical day was like down there, and the type of service that you were providing with your critical response team?
Okay. Well, let's see, the very first day I showed up on scene after getting my passcode ID card. We headed over to the site. It was very early in the morning. Once we got acclimated to the scene, and you can imagine, you know, your first time walking onto the scene, you're a bit of a deer in the headlights, seeing the devastation that was before us. And we would just walk the site. So, you know, I might walk around, and if somebody, you know, critical incident stress briefing was meant to be something at the close of an incident to give the people a chance to talk about their experience and to mitigate the effects of PTSD and other issues that might crop up later on. When we're working at a site like the World Trade Center, or certainly the Pentagon over in Shanksville, they also had assistance there. But at the World Trade Center, you know, it was such an active scene. Now, I'm a former firefighter. I also was a medic. I've worked with the police. My dad was a cop. My brother is also a law enforcement officer. And so, you know, you bring all of that experience and peer support into view. But you're walking around, you're looking at an active scene. I know as a firefighter, this is not the time that I want to be talking about my feelings. Some people do. A lot of people just aren't ready. We need to keep that stoic, cold professionalism in order to get the job done. And so understanding that, you know, you just walk the site. If somebody wants to talk, you talk. If they don't, you don't. Sometimes you're not talking so much about their feelings as you are just about things in general. You know, being there for as long as that I was, you know, you'd see the same people over and over again, and so maybe a week later, you know, then they'd be coming over and saying, gee, you know, I found a buddy of mine under the rubble today. And so then you talk. And you talk about whatever they want. It's always kept strictly confidential, and I continue to maintain that confidentiality today. That's important. It's about trust and honoring one another.
Well, are there any, do you have any statistics at hand on, you know, like actually how many people did suffer from PTSD after that effect? Is that been codified and logged?
Well, I don't think that there's a specific number. I mean, you can go to the World Trade Center Health Program, which I would urge everyone. You know, we had so many wonderful guys from construction crews and all the different labor unions down there, the volunteers, everybody that showed up from the New York tri-state area as well as all over the country. They need to get into this World Trade Center Health Program, which does provide counseling. So if there is some issues with some or PTSD, they can get some help. I don't have specific numbers on how many actually suffer from PTS. Those are can be rather abstract, but there are over 70,000 responders and survivors that live all over the country. There's over 8,500 that are in the national program. That means all those other states outside of the metro area. And there's over 63,000 of them getting medical monitoring. You know, there's we can talk about the thousands that have cancers right now. Those that we have over 33,000, 34,000 now that have at least one 9/11 condition, health issue, and over 2/3 of that number, so over 20,000, have more than one. And a lot of those more than one is going to include the PTSD.
Those are some pretty amazing statistics. They're huge numbers, and you might almost say epidemic proportions.
Oh, absolutely epidemic. You know, and this is where the droga was so important to give that. Now that's a stress relief off of us as it is. To know that we at least have that health care, we have the compensation fund. It's a split deal, the droga. But now we have our health care until 2090. You know, that's going to cover us for the remainder of our life. And that was a huge problem because we have people that have cancers and their cancer treatments, chemo, radiation, the medications alone can be like $10,000 a month. $10,000 a month. So are you going to go ahead and you're going to pay your house mortgage or your medical bills? You're going to put food on the table for your kids? Are you going to be able to cover these medical bills? You know, and unfortunately, and sadly, nobody should ever have to make that kind of decision. So the Droga Health Bill took all of that stress off of us because if you have a certified condition relative to your service done at the World Trade Center, the health program, which is run under NIOSH and the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, covers your conditions at 100%. So those treatments and your medications are covered. And that's what's really saving a lot of people right now. Because without it, we'd be in a big world of hurt.
Tell us about your Facebook and the activities that you now perform, working with and helping an awful lot of people that you reach today.
Well, we do have a website. You know, if anybody wants to visit that, the links to our Facebook page are there as well as our Twitter feed and a lot of very helpful links to the health program. You can find the phone number there. The website is 9-11rescueworkersandfriends.org, and you can find a lot of the links and the information you want there. Our group started out, I was actually in Iraq at the time. I served overseas as a contractor following the attacks for a few years. And while I was in Iraq, what I was seeing was I was getting sicker. I knew there was something going on, but there was nothing out there. You couldn't find anything. Facebook had really just gone public, so this was back around 2007, and they'd really only just gone public at that time. And I'm looking around, there's nothing on there about 9/11. I'm over in Qatar and Iraq, and getting internet access was wonderful when you could get it. And so trying to find any articles, what was going on, all of this information was near impossible. So I started up this 9/11 Rescue Workers and Friends. And from there, our forum has grown. We keep, it's a closed group as far as we vet people who want into the group. We keep it a very trusted group that way. And it works really well because now we have people that reach out to one another. If I have a guy from Local 3 or NYPD or FDNY or any of the myriad Red Cross, we have a lot of Red Cross members, we have somebody there and they want to talk to somebody else similar to their background and experience, that's where peer support kicks in. So now they're meeting other people, and they're meeting them online, and then we have some gatherings that we do in the city.
The work you do is just tremendous, and we're going to keep in touch with you. This needs to continue, and it's something that I mean, words cannot express the great work you do. This is Neil Tupel for the Labor Press Network, and we provide you with Blue Collar Buzz, and our co-host is Bill Hopefield, and we've been talking with the attorneys from Pitta, Giblin Baione, Chris Baione and Vito Pitta. And also joining us is Claudia Thomas, talking about the 9/11 benefits legislation.
Claudia, we want to thank you again for being part of our program today. And, when people such as yourself tell their personal stories about what happened that day and what's happened since, it puts us in touch with the irony that one of the most horrible days in the history of the United States was also an opportunity for a lot of Americans from all over the country to show just what a great country this is.